Okay, so without further ado, can you please give a warm welcome to today's speaker, Christina Enright.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, great. So it's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for your warm welcome. I'm a child and family psychotherapist, so I work with families from various backgrounds with various difficulties. But the other thing that I do is I like to talk to people about what the current research says about brain development in children, for babies and children. Because I think this is information that should be available to everybody, not just psychologists, therapists, medical professionals, social workers. It's information that if we all know, it can make an enormous difference to how we live our lives in our relationships, with it, not just with our children, but also with each other, with our partners, with our friends, with our extended family. So what I'm going to talk to you about today extends across many different aspects of our lives. And I hope you go away feeling informed, but also inspired in what you bring to other people, to your relationships in your life, because I'm going to be talking about the importance of those relationships for our physical and our mental health. So we know now from all the research in neuroscience that a child's brain development is very much dependent on the quality of the social relationships that child has in their lives. And the child's, the foundations of the brain are very much built on those relationships, what they bring to the child and how they manifest as impact on the brain. So I'll be talking about that. So the aim of the presentation is really to talk to you about the neuroscience and how emotional availability and the input in terms of the relational quality of the adults around the child have a powerful impact on the neurochemistry, the neurobiology, so the structural aspects of brain development, the neurochemical, so how the hormones and chemicals respond in our brains and in our bodies, and overall how that influences the structural development of the brain, but also the social and emotional and cognitive development. Just before I get going, I really just wanted to, I'm curious about what brought many of you here today. So would anybody be willing to say, if you had a question in your mind that you brought with you that you'd like to explore? Yeah.
Hi. I have two young toddlers at home. They're 2 and 3, and they're in creche part-time, and we're thinking about putting them into creche full-time. And I don't know if being in a creche in these formative years will have any negative impact, and it's something that does kind of concern us and worry us. So for me, it's around, I suppose, if we're not available as parents,
okay,
does that have any kind of impact?
That's a good question. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I've 3 young kids, and just obviously interested in the neuroscience on their direct development, but also just curious as to how the relationship between the parents can impact the children, and any of the science around that could be useful.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to to hold these questions. There's a pen here somewhere. So we have less than an hour left. So I'm just going to capture that as parents together, and then young children in creches. Just so, because of the limited time we have, we won't be able to go into any of this in great detail, but hopefully I'll be able to touch on it for you in talking about the what it is that shapes brain development. Okay, so the jury is in now. We know that we need each other. People need people. That's how we develop in a healthy way, both physically and emotionally. And I do add in physical because there's quite a few studies now across the world that demonstrate the importance of emotional health for physical health. So relationships build brains and minds, we know that. We know that from the neuroscience and the research into biochemistry, that actually relationships come to regulate our nervous systems. So they come to bring us into emotional balance if they work well. And that's because our hormonal systems sync with each other. But this is particularly important for infants, for babies. And I'll be elaborating on this as I go along. But for babies and for all of us, you know the idea of being in sync with each other? You know, have you heard of that? And it is, in terms of being emotionally in sync, it means how neurobiologically, biochemically we're in sync with each other. That's how our systems are connecting on that level. And biochemistry is like electricity. We can't see it, but we know it exists, right? Is everybody convinced electricity exists by now? So it's interesting, there are all these chemical processes going on that affect us with each other, but we don't know it's happening, but certainly the research has been able to substantiate that. And the more, so a little proposition that I'm throwing out to you today is the more individualistic we become, the more anxious and depressed we become as humans. And there's plenty of evidence to demonstrate that. Social isolation holds the biggest threat to our mental health. And you may well know that the greatest form of torture is what? Solitary confinement. And it's used for a reason, because it really has such a detrimental impact on us as human beings. Relationships heal troubled brains. We also know that from the research into how therapy works. And actually across thousands of therapeutic approaches, there's many models of therapy. But we know the common denominator in terms of what makes a difference is the quality of the relationship between the practitioner and the client. And actually, I would say that goes for any professional. If you go to your GP, if your GP is not particularly relational, it will be a very different experience and outcome for you. Would you agree with that? And there is a lot of research into the relationship with the medical practitioner and how that can impact and whether we get better and how quickly we get better. So that's all that's really interesting. And we're only as resilient as humans as the people we're connected to. So we're all both vulnerable and resilient. So it's not that one person is resilient and another isn't, but it depends on many factors. So resilience is actually a social phenomenon rather than just about the grit that you have as a human being, although that comes into it, how you develop your capacity to be able to bounce back from stress and challenge. But without other people around us, actually we will not be particularly resilient. And something very important, which is actually widely known in research and education, but it's not necessarily mirrored in our educational systems as they function on the ground, is that learning is a social experience. Children learn from people they like. Would you agree with that from your experience in school? If you didn't have a relationship with the teacher, how well did you do with that subject? Yeah, so in terms of how we take on new skills, new information, new knowledge, new awareness, those relationships are really key. And what we're seeing now in terms of people who have developed mental health problems, what makes a difference is not somebody pinning a diagnosis on them and telling them what's wrong with them, but it's actually people coming together as a group in a community and thinking about their strengths and thinking about what it is that empowers them to be able to overcome the challenges that they're facing with their mental health. So the facts from neuroscience about babies' brains, and we've got a little exhibit over here in the corner, is that babies are born with 100 billion neurons. Did you know that? That's a lot of neurons, right? But they're not connected, that's the thing. They're there in the brain, but they're not connected yet. And so they're waiting, and they need that social experience in order to connect. They need that interaction with the adults around the baby. The baby needs that. in order for those connections to get made. And by the age of 3, what we're finding from neuroscience is that about 85 to 90% of a baby's brain is connected. So that's why the first 3 years are so vital. And that baby's experience is going to have a big impact on how they move forward. So we're talking about foundational development of the brain. Now, it's important to know that actually not all is lost. If a baby has a poor experience, some babies are born into families where parents are not available, not able emotionally to take care of them because they have maybe drug problems, alcohol problems or whatever, or depression gets in the way. And through no fault of the parent, through no fault of their own, it can make it difficult for them to connect. And for those babies, if they do have a poor start, the science shows that actually those connections can develop later on if the baby has the experience of the input for that. So we also know from science that the brain is like a muscle. If we don't use it, we lose it. And certainly in early development, a baby's born with far more neurons than they actually need. And so if they're not being stimulated, the baby's not having a variety of social, emotional, cognitive experiences, physical experiences, then those neurons don't connect up. And actually what the neuroscience says, they actually die away. They wither and die if they're not stimulated and not used. And also, it's interesting because I think we're living in a world, we have been certainly through probably the 90s, the era of kind of the frontal brain and talking a lot about cognition and rational thinking. But actually what the science is saying now is the social influence, the social experience that a baby has that has the greatest impact on the quality of brain development. And we know that the brain builds from the base upwards. So you have your very primitive brain here at the back. So a baby's not born with the higher structures built yet, but they have the deeper emotional structures. And within that, we have our primitive brain, but also our emotional brain. So we know, you know only too well that babies cry a lot, don't they? Not yours. Oh, wow, you're very lucky. You're very lucky. Not every parent will have had that experience. But babies cry from their primitive brain because they're terrified. They've never been here before, or actually, that depends on whether you believe in reincarnation or not. But when I say they don't know what to do, they need the adults to guide them, to give them information, to help them make sense of their experience in order to feel safe and secure. And so babies will work from that primitive brain and cry when things are scary or they're anxious or their heart are in need of care. And these circuits, which are in the deeper primitive brain and the emotional brain, they're the structures on which later brain development gets built. And how those structures are actually nurtured in the first 3 years particularly is very important, as I'll go on to talk about. So that's a little picture of your brain. That's the one side. If somebody took a chainsaw and cut your head in half, I hope that never happens to anybody in this audience. And that's what you'll see. And here you've got these deeper structures. Sorry, it's not coming up very well with the... So here you've got the deeper structures, the primitive brain, and that bit that goes across here and down here is the emotional brain, the limbic brain it's called. And in that you've got this structure called the amygdala, which is the alarm system. And if you're frightened, or if you're anxious, or if you're angry, and some positive emotions are connected to the amygdala as well, but very much connected with fear and anxiety and threatening experiences where you perceive threat, your amygdala will go off. It's your alarm. It's like the alarm in your house, your fire alarm or your burglar alarm. If something feels threatening, the alarm will go off, and that will put you into, you know this, I'm sure, fight, flight, or freeze. Yeah, and that propels you to react in order to survive and protect yourself. That's how we take care of ourselves as humans, and that's how we survive. So a baby doesn't actually have the higher brain. So the part across the top and at the front here is called the prefrontal cortex. Well, the whole structure is called the cortex. But this here is particularly important. It's the prefrontal cortex. And that's the part of the brain that's used to think, reflect. What else might you use it for? You think planning, great. Anything else? Learning, yes. Processing information, yeah. Sorry? Predict, brilliant, yeah. So to predict things, to be able to analyze information and then make predictions, to draw conclusions, yeah. So we've got problem solving in there as well. We've got impulse control, emotional regulation. So we need this part of our brain to help to regulate our emotions. So you can see how important it is that the frontal lobe is connected to the amygdala, particularly the limbic part of the brain, because those two parts of the brain need to work in tandem well for us to be able to manage ourselves, particularly around our more primitive emotions, our impulse, desiring something in a moment. And, you know, if we make a rash decision, that's it, I'm going to have it. That'll be the primitive brain making the decision rather than you thinking, actually, is this the right thing for me right now? Or is this a good thing to do? Is it an honourable thing to do or whatever? So that helps us to make moral choices as well. Okay? So that's just to give you a picture of the growth, the development of neuronal connections from a newborn to adulthood. So this is the adult one here. This is covered. So you can see the rapid development of connections that happen. And this is a healthy development where a baby is interacted with and stimulated. You see how those neuronal connections get made and how they become abundant. Because the more stimulation, now I have to qualify this because I don't want any of you going home and suddenly going to the library and getting 20 books and doing that sort of, what do you call that flash thing with your child where you're showing them lots of flashcards. It doesn't work like that. The stimulation, as I'll explain in a minute, needs to be attuned to the baby. And that's the problem about going in with, let's give them more stimulation and then they'll get triple A's in their Leaving Cert when they're done. It doesn't work like that. So the stimulation is important, but how that stimulation comes in is really crucial, because what we could do is we could overwhelm the baby's brain with stimulation and they could feel too much. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So let's have a look at this video, or some of it. I'm just aware of time is going very quickly and there's lots of things I want to show you. So this is to show you the importance of social connection for a baby. So the baby's speaking for themselves, and it shows you what happens if that social connection gets taken away. So it's an experiment that was created by psychologists about 35 years ago to try and get into the experience of the baby rather than trying to do lots of, crunching lots of numbers. Really very much a social, emotional, qualitative type of research. So, any thoughts about that?
People using their phones.
Phones.
Yeah, I think using your tablets and all that kind of stuff, and they're saying now that kids are trying their best to get your attention and you're just stuck in it.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it made me think of.
So it made you think about that. Yeah, great. So we can get preoccupied as adults, right? And the reason I'm here is because people need to know this information. And once you have information, you can be more aware, right? I don't blame parents for getting it wrong. But I think, I'm a parent, my son's well grown up now, but if I had this information 33 years ago, I think life would be a lot easier for him now. But we learn, and we can only, what I say to the parents I work with, we can only work with the information we have at any moment in time. Our parents, some of us who are older, were told, my mum was told to push us down the end of the field and leave us in the fresh air because it would make our lungs stronger. So when we were crying, Nobody heard us and nobody came. I've been in therapy since. But parents, might not be aware and might be distracted, and work can be very demanding. There's all sorts of reasons why parents can get taken away from their babies and their children. So here's the science. Yeah. Anybody else want to comment on that?
So apart from the parent kind of shutting down in terms of reaction, what's the difference between, I have 2 young boys, by the way, and like, for example, in the mornings we're getting ready, it's a madhouse, and what we actually do quite regularly is, okay, there's an iPad, whatever cartoon of the flavour of the month is on at the moment, and the two of them, a 2.5-year-old and a 1-year-old, will shut up and watch the screen, and they'll be happy while we, get dressed and get out the door with them. Is that different? Is that like, because it's not an actual human interaction, is that as ugly a thing?
So it's about the frequency of being in contact or out of contact. That's the issue. So it's not whether you do. I mean, let's face it, as parents, you have to find strategies to manage, your busy day, the demands. You've got to get out to work. That's the reality. And so if you use a video, in a moment to help, keep the children from running out the front door or climbing the walls or whatever, that's different from actually children who are on screens incessantly, or parents who are on screens incessantly. I'll go on to talk about what it is about the social interaction that's so key. So parenting just needs to be good enough. Is there a sigh of relief in the room? Doesn't have to be perfect. And in fact, as I'll talk about perfect parenting, so-called, there's no such thing, but parents who want to be perfect, it can be detrimental to their children. So, think about what I'm saying, and then, balance it out, have a discussion, and think, is this okay? It probably is, if it's only in a moment to get the job done. Yeah. Okay. So some of you might have been surprised by that baby's response. Adults traditionally have assumed that babies were born with what's known as a kind of blank slate, tabula rasa, like a computer that just arrives at your home, that's not been, what do you call it here? Programmed. So that's the idea. I'm not very computer literate, I have to admit. Technology terrifies me most of the time. But actually, it's very much, the previous thinking was very much like that. The baby arrives like the laptop that comes in the post, and I turn it on and I expect it just to work, not realizing it has to be programmed. So we know now that babies are actually born with innate capacities for interacting and connecting, which have a profound effect on their development and how that's responded to. And just in case you think this is just a female phenomenon, I want to show you a bit of this video, because traditionally women have been seen as the important caregivers for babies and young children, but actually dads are just as important. It's about the relationship. It's not about your gender. It's about the quality of the relationship you bring to this child. So, what is it that parents do that builds that baby's brain? And we know from the research there are 5 main things. So 5 building blocks of the brain, or a formula, if you like, a different type of formula, apart from a feeding formula, feeding the brain in this case. So the parent responds. So a baby and a child will initiate when they want connection. So it may be connection just to play and have some fun. It may be connection for stimulation because they're bored, or it may be connection because they want to be calmed down and soothed and helped with their feelings because they can't do it for themselves. And so in order for a parent to respond appropriately, what's very important is that the parent is able to read the cues of the baby or the child. Oh, I wonder if she's crying because she needs a nappy change. Or maybe she's hungry. Or maybe she's bored. Or maybe she's very frightened because there was just a loud noise went off next door. And that's really, really key. And that asks for your intuitive judgment. So your brain connecting with your body to help you to attune and empathize with what it is that the baby is needing. And actually for new parents, that can take time, right? When you first have a baby, it's like, oh my God, what do I do with this? For all parents. But you get into the baby's rhythm. You get to know your baby gets to know you, and you actually learn the baby's temperament, which is very important, because no two babies are the same. And that's very important if any of you if you go onto the internet or use parenting books, because sometimes the blogs and the books will actually present stock responses for all babies. Controlled crying is one of them. When a child is older, time out. But actually, if our babies and our children are individual, they will need an individual response, which comes from the moment, from you perceiving what it is that they actually need from you. So we need to notice the baby's needs and read those cues and then respond in an attuned way as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then the second element of what a parent does is to use contact. So for young babies, we pick them up and we cuddle them and we hold them a lot. And we know from research, by the age of about 6 to 9 months, babies start to need less and less picking up and holding. But they still need contact. They need us to give them cuddles, to comfort them when they're distressed. But as a child develops, that need for continual holding reduces. And that physical contact, that touch, is absolutely vital for the brain and the body to develop, to wire up, but also for those feel-good hormones to come in. So we've got oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin. Dopamine is a very important hormone for learning and for focus and attention. And oxytocin, I don't know if you know, but it's labeled the love hormone. So we stimulate, we secrete oxytocin when we come into any loving or intimate contact with another person. So it could be a lovely experience with a friend. It doesn't have to be a romantic partner. But parents and children stimulate the production of oxytocin in each other when they interact in joyful, interactive experiences. The other important thing about the touch is actually helps us to learn to feel ourselves in our bodies. And that kind of might seem a bit of a strange thing to say, but really feeling embodied, feeling grounded in your own body and connected to all of your organs, because a lot of our emotions, our ability to perceive our emotions comes from our viscera. The vagus nerve passes right down from the brain into our vital organs, lungs, throat, kidneys, stomach. And in order for us to be able to know how we feel and to be able to then communicate that, we need to be able to perceive those emotions. And if we're cut off from our bodies, we're unable to do that. So the third element of what a parent does to build a baby's brain is actually how they manage their own emotions. So a parent being able to regulate themselves, ourselves when we're upset, distressed, angry, that before we respond to our baby, we check, how am I feeling? Oh, right, I'm feeling really angry. Maybe now's not the time for me to deal with this, or maybe I'll get my partner to deal with it. And so I'm just going to this slide to show you, it's the idea of securing your own oxygen mask before you secure others. You know, when you're on an airplane and they say, put your own oxygen mask on before you put on your child's. And I've always thought that sounded counterintuitive, but when you think about it, actually, you can't save somebody else unless you're actually protected yourself. So similarly with your own emotions, you can't regulate a baby or a young child unless you're regulated. Because remember what I said about the neurochemicals, how they get triggered, how they get stimulated between us, between our brains, our two brains interacting with each other, and our bodies too. If we're angry or we're very anxious, then the baby or the child's neurobiological system will pick that up, and those corresponding emotions will be triggered in them. So really paying attention to our own arousal levels and trying to calm ourselves down in order to be able to calm them down is very important. And actually what's really key to know is that babies actually learn to regulate not just their emotions, but their whole rhythms, circadian rhythms, through the physical holding from the parent. I mean all of these 5 things actually, but particularly the physical holding. So when a baby cries, that will trigger some discomfort in you quite naturally as a parent, because that's nature's way of making sure that you don't sit and continue watching Game of Thrones on TV, that you actually respond to the baby. Otherwise you might not. So we're made uncomfortable, which propels us into responding. And then what happens is, as we hold the baby and we start to calm the baby and soothe the baby, our arousal level comes down, and what the baby finds out, that's how you calm down, is it? Oh, that's very interesting. Obviously not, because babies don't have cognition yet. But the baby system learns. It's a training procedure. This is how you calm down. Watch mummy, watch daddy. As mummy and daddy calm down, the baby system gets that information. And over and over and over, through time, the baby's system, baby's arousal system, neurobiological system, brain, body is able to do that for themselves when they get distressed, anxious, upset. Does that make sense? So we're not born with a capacity to emotionally regulate. We have to learn it. And we learn it as babies and young children from the adults around us regulating themselves and then showing us how it's done. You can imagine if a parent, all parents get angry and get frustrated and get anxious. That's quite natural. But as long as it's not continuous and all the time, then that's not going to have a detrimental effect on a child. But you can imagine being around somebody who's very angry all the time. What does that do to you? How does that make your system feel? I'm not just talking about your thoughts, but also your whole being. What does that feel like? Would you imagine? And it may not be. You might feel threatened and under attack. Does it put you on kind of defense, in a defensive mode? Because what's happening is those stress hormones are cascading around your body because they're being triggered by the other person's level of emotions. And that's why it's so important that we're really thinking about our own regulation as we're looking after our babies and our children. And of course each other, because you'll have a similar experience with a partner or friends. If they're constantly dysregulated, then you're going to pick that up and you're going to feel that. And then the 4th component of what parents do is play. Now, playing, we all know it's a good idea to play with the child, right? But here we're not just talking about, playing together, playing a ball game together, or reading them a story, or playing a board game. We're talking about right from the very beginning with an infant, the face-to-face interaction that happens between parent and child, and how that has a huge impact on how the brain connects up. So when you see a baby and you go to interact with a baby, what do you find yourself doing? Have you noticed? Some of you might not have been around a baby recently, but what do you notice yourself doing?
Right.
You lean in. What else do you do?
Smile.
You smile. You make, they don't think they're silly. Adults think they're silly. But we start to make these noises, these sounds. What are the sounds like? Does anybody want to do a demonstration? So you raise the pitch of your voice. Very important. What else do you do?
Expressive.
You become more expressive. Your face You saw that mum, when she re-engaged, she was very animated. So you look excited, interested and excited. Very important. You start to intonate your words. You elongate them. And you do a rhythmical voice. Oh, look at you, aren't you so gorgeous? How are you today? Does anybody talk to their partner like that? Believe me, I had some people living in my house once, and they did, and it was really irritating. But mostly adults don't. But we find ourselves, there's an innate drive to do that with babies. Isn't that interesting? Because it's called infant-directed speech in science, but we talk about parentese or baby talk. But it's so important because it's the building blocks of social interaction. Babies learn, one, how to make eye contact. They learn how to turn take. So I have a go, you have a go. My turn, your turn. What is that important for? Having conversations with people, social conversations. Do you know people who don't turn take very well? Yeah? So that is very important because it helps us to connect. The timing, all of that needs very precise judgment. And babies learn that from their parents doing that face-to-face. They also learn about how to read other people's emotions. So if I'm looking at you and you look sad, I know you don't right now. So if you're a baby, I might say, oh, you look really sad. And what I'll do as a parent or an adult, if I'm emotionally attuned and I'm empathic, I'll display that emotion on my face. And that will get reflected back to you. And what I'll be saying to you is, I get it, you're really sad. The baby feels great when that happens. As opposed to, oh, you look really happy. And the baby's like, no, I'm not. But they can't tell us that. But they might cry because we didn't get them. That's called misattunement. So when we do that, oh, you look so sad, we're giving them the information about that emotion. This is what sad looks like. You're sad. I'm resonating with the emotion. That's the empathy. And I teach my child how to understand their own emotions, how to read other people's emotions, and how to develop the vocabulary. Sad. So now I have a word for sad. Because my mummy or my daddy tells me what sad is. Oh, if you're not coming with the feed quickly enough and the baby's crying angrily. And you might say, oh, you're really angry at mummy, aren't you? Or daddy. But you're not angry when you're saying that. But you're helping the baby to understand what that emotion is. All of that and much more comes from those face-to-face interactions, which are so key. And then we have talk, which is the conversation, the words, the language. And you can see how these are all interlinked. You know, we do all of these in the blink of an eye. We don't break them down and say, right now I'm going to talk to you. We actually do everything. We look and we go, oh, aren't you so beautiful? We start to use the language and we use the infant-directed speech because that is what gives the baby the basis of language. They're called proto-conversations, where we're having this conversation. You make a sound, I echo back the sound to you. Like you might say, ga, 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 as babies often say. Not yet, but it's coming. And so what attuned parents do is they reflect back the sound, they mirror the sound back to the baby, ga, ga, ga. And that is the building blocks of language. Teaches the baby about the social, particularly the social aspects of language. But there's so much more in there with the play and the talk because it says, you're really important. You're a valuable human being. You are deserving of my time and attention and my focus. And I'm really interested in you. So the excitement is a really key part of this. The animation, because I'm saying to my baby, oh, I'm so interested in you and I really love interacting with you. You feel that and that affects your physiology. It affects the baby's physiology and you mirror each other. And that is a perfect storm for a communication that works well.
Is there any science around the effect that younger siblings get? Because my third child definitely got way less than my first or even second child, because you're so busy
Yeah.
dealing with the
yeah.
older ones.
Yeah.
And
And I was 9 of 12. So I know what you're talking about. I guess it's difficult. The more children you have, the more your demands there are on your resources, your intention, your focus, your time, your capacity, your energy. That's the hard thing about being a parent, isn't it, and having a number of children. I don't know specifically about research in relation. There's lots of research on sibling, on birth order, and there are differences in relation to that. But what I want you to go away with is knowing this, but also knowing that children just need enough. We need to be just good enough as parents. And one of the problems currently is called helicopter parenting, where parents are so hyper anxious about being good enough, they're actually hampering their child's development. So, this is why the first 3 years is so key, because you're building the foundations of a house, creating the structural foundations, which then the house gets built on. Strong foundations, and then you'll have a strong house. So as children, we know from the research that children need a certain amount of, or babies even, need a certain amount of challenge to be able to learn to be resilient. So when mum stopped talking to this baby and the baby got upset, that wasn't damaging for that baby. It would have been if mum hadn't come back. What happened was the baby started to use their resources. Did you see what was going on with the baby? What was she doing? She was trying to get mum back, so she was raising her hands. They played a game. So in her memory systems, there's this game, this worked before, this helped us connect. She points, she does a number of things. And then she does something called amplification. She starts to increase the intensity of her communication, her voice and her body language. Because if you're not getting it, the child, this, any of you have young children, they will up the ante. And that's because it's so terrifying to be disconnected from your parent, and you're afraid as a small child, you don't have the mechanisms to be able to think, actually, Daddy's gone, but he's coming back. I mean, that takes some time to develop that security and that understanding. Or Daddy's never going to talk to me again. Fear is of abandonment and of losing a parent's love. So important to note that resilience is built from a certain amount of challenge. So what builds resilience for this child is that she tries these different things to get mum back, and then mum responds. And that helps her to feel masterful. It helps her to feel, I can have an effect on somebody else. See what I can do. When my mummy's not paying attention to me, I can get mum back. So what's important is that it becomes predictable, that the parent has read the baby's signals or the child's signals and accurately and emotionally attuned. Oh, I'm sorry, I was there somewhere, my head was somewhere else. I'm sorry I wasn't listening to you. What did you want to tell me? Isn't that what we do as parents? And so it's that coming back in and really acknowledging the child's efforts. Oh, you really wanted to get my attention. That helps the child to feel, yeah, I can get my mummy back or my daddy back. I can make things happen. So what's important is the repair, it's the reconnection between parent and child. So, if you lose the connection temporarily, that's okay. It just needs to be repaired. If you shout at your child, which you will do because you're human, yeah, right? Then, I'm sorry I shouted at you. Mummy's, having a bad day today and I shouldn't have shouted. I'm sorry for doing that. That's what builds resilience. Not the fact that you never shout at your child, but that you shouted and you repaired. So we're just about to finish. But what I was saying earlier on about the stimulation needs to be in tune. So as you're interacting with your baby or your child is reading their body language. So if we're bombarding them with flashcards because we want them to do better in English at Leaving Cert, and they're kind of cringing and trying to pull away, that's the communication. that they're overwhelmed. It's too much, it's too difficult. So constantly reading that body language and the cues that are given off so that we can actually work out how much to engage, how often, for how long, is the most helpful thing. And as I said, what's really empowering for a baby and a small child is that they know they have an impact on you. If they try to connect with you and you respond, that's very empowering. If they lose you and you come back, that's very empowering. And that is what builds resilience. So Dan Siegel, who's an American psychologist, psychotherapist, says, we now know that the way to help a child develop optimally is to help her create connections in her brain, her whole brain, that develop skills that lead to better relationships, better mental health, and more meaningful lives. You could call it brain sculpting or brain building. Whatever phase you prefer, the point is crucial and thrilling. As a result of the words we use and the emotions we take, children's brains will actually change and be built as they undergo new experiences. And that leaves a positive note that the brain is plastic for life. Very important for somebody of my age to know that. But we have periods of growth and proliferation, and there's a reorganization between about 11 and 24. But the brain can change. Change the experience of the outside world, and the brain will change. Change the way we interact with children, and their brains will change. Thank you all very much for listening.